which clearly must be the Tory organisers, who've decided that I'm persona non grata, or the modern-day carrier of the plague virus, and therefore, although lobbyists and politicians of all hues are allowed inside the secure zone, I'm banned, and my name is not to appear on any of the conference programmes advertising fringe events. And it made me laugh. I've just been for a meeting. That's what we have to call it these days. I'm told I spend too much time drinking beer in pubs. So I've just been for a meeting with Alistair Campbell. Alistair Campbell is welcome inside the Tory party conference. Despite the fact he spent years trying to destroy the Conservative Party, and me, who's been as helpful as he possibly could be to David Cameron at all opportunities, is not allowed in. Well, I'm allowed here, and thank you to the Freedom Association for inviting me. It is a remarkable Tory conference, this one. Although in some ways the UKIP one was the other week. Very remarkable, for all the wrong reasons. But I'm cheered up, because if Godfrey Bloom disrupted my conference, I like to think I'm disrupting and ruining David Cameron's. Let's just remember where we are. 1 year ago, at this conference, it was the stated intent of the Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party that there would not, I repeat, not, be a referendum on the European question, and there absolutely would not be a referendum on our membership of the European Union. Because, as David Cameron himself said 5 times in public, I don't want a referendum on our membership of the Union because I believe we're better off remaining members of it. By which he meant, damn you, I've decided that you won't even be given the chance to say that we should leave. But here we are today, and I've just been told by Bill Cash that I'm jolly well letting down the side, and that we should all in UKIP pack up our tents and go home, because everything now is safe with the Eurosceptic Mr. Cameron. Well, I have a bit of trouble believing that. I have trouble believing it because this, of course, is the same David Cameron who gave us, do you remember, a cast iron guarantee? Yeah. I give you this cast iron guarantee that if I become Prime Minister, there'll be a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. And indeed, the Conservatives won the Euro elections of 2009 on that pledge. I have a bit of a problem with it because he says he first has to secure a majority at the next election, which frankly looks impossible. And it looks impossible because of where we are geographically today, Mr. Chairman. Because if you look at Liverpool, at Leeds, at Manchester, at Newcastle, at Hull, if you look at the big northern cities, you will see the Conservative Party is now disappearing and dying in these cities the way that it did in Scotland. So they're not going to win a majority at the next election. And the idea that we should enter a process that would take from start to finish just over 4 years, well, I was delighted that Digby Jones, the former CBI Director General, and indeed the former Trade Minister under Gordon Brown, a man that has visited Brussels almost as often as I have over the last few years, that Digby Jones said that actually the argument that it creates uncertainty is right. And why on earth should British business wait for a further 4 years for this matter to be resolved? You see, what's really happened here is Mr. Cameron has pledged a referendum in an attempt to kick the issue into the long grass beyond the next general election, and it's been done to get UKIP off his back. It's as simple as that. And I would argue, ladies and gentlemen, that if we had not done, if we as a party had not advanced the way we have, we would not have had as many backbench Tory rebels, really, firstly worried for their lives in terms of votes, but secondly, becoming emboldened. As the political agenda has moved, they felt able to speak their mind, and that, of course, I do applaud being a good thing. This referendum pledge is only there because of the strength of UKIP. And my goodness me, we're seeing it now in so many other areas. They've even launched a poster truck campaign in London. I don't know whether you've seen it. It made the National Front stuff from the 70s look quite modern, you know. If you're illegal, we're coming to get you and we're going to boot you out. So they're being tough on immigration. And we hear they're going to be tough on the long-term unemployed. And statement after statement that we now get, clearly inspired and drawn up by an Australian, the didgeridoo in Downing Street, perhaps we should call him. All of it may look good, but remember, Cameron has been leader since 2005. You can't do a 180 turn on all of these issues for the last 18 months of a premiership and actually expect to be genuinely believed. And I was absolutely convinced that we really are diametrically opposed to the Conservative Party by the actions recently, I must say, over Syria. In particular, William Hague, who appeared to be the international warmonger-in-chief, a man urging that we arm the rebels, despite the fact we know that Al-Qaeda have seriously infiltrated those rebels, and then, of course, pushing on to saying that we should launch military action. I'm very pleased that we took the stance we did. I'm very pleased that backbenchers defied their own party. I am very pleased that our Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister were humiliated over the issue of going to war in Syria, because since that parliamentary vote, things look very much better than they did before. So I was absolutely convinced that we were right about that. And I've come to this Tory conference to give a very simple message to the delegates, and it's this. There's lots of talk about the next election. But the next election is not the general election, as you believe, reading the newspapers every day. The next election is, in fact, the European elections. And it takes place on May the 22nd next year, in conjunction with 5,000 local council seats. And I put it to you, good Conservatives, who've stuck with this through thick and thin, I put it to you that if you believe in an independent, self-governing Britain, that trades with Europe, that cooperates with Europe, that is friends with Europe, for goodness sake, but not governed by people like Herman Van Rompuy. I'm still not on the Christmas card list, believe me. But if you believe in those things, you have to vote UKIP at the elections on May the 22nd next year. And the first reason I believe you have to vote UKIP is because a big, strong result for UKIP will strengthen the Prime Minister's resolve and promise to have a referendum. Cast Iron Dave, given his recent track record on this, needs a bit of bolstering. I also believe that a big UKIP vote can bring the referendum forward. Because actually, I don't want to wait until after the next general election. My proposal would be that we have this referendum a month before the next general election. Not hard to do. You break up the coalition, you put a caretaker government in place, you have a referendum, and then a few weeks later you have a general election. And the second reason I believe that a big UKIP vote from Conservatives next year makes sense is that actually, ironically, it might help Mr Cameron's negotiating position in Brussels. You see, an earthquake through British politics will send shockwaves and tremors to Brussels. If they begin to seriously think that given a referendum the British people would vote to leave, they may start to act. And Mr Cameron may just get the odd concession here and there. It wouldn't suit me. I don't want concessions. I don't want crumbs from the table. I want the British Parliament to be a sovereign parliament of a nation that governs itself through the ballot box. But even if you're one of those people who takes the view that a bit of renegotiation would be good, well, voting UKIP will actually strengthen Mr Cameron's hand. But of course, that was what I thought I was coming to say. But it's all been rather engulfed by speculation and debate over deals. What deals are we going to do at the next election? Well, I would have thought the very fact, Chairman, that I'm banned from the secure zone, and that on the MAR programme yesterday, he couldn't even bring himself to mention my name. Whenever MAR mentioned my name, he sort of turned away. And whenever UKIP was discussed, he talked about those tempted by other parties. I mean, we really are the modern-day equivalent of the plague carrier, as far as Mr Cameron's concerned. And in fact, you can see all the way through. I even picked it up from Bill Cash in a debate I did a couple of hours ago, that Tory High Command view UKIP, frankly, as being lower orders, not really of sufficient class to be treated seriously, and they must be appalled that as the deputy leader of UKIP, we've got a working class boy from the docks of Mersey. You know, that isn't good enough for the modern day Conservative Party. So they view us with contempt. And if there was even to be the prospect of a deal, you know, it takes two to tango, and it would need them to want to come and talk to us. But there's another reason that I think is completely misunderstood about UKIP. You know, there is this assumption going around that everybody that votes UKIP is a Conservative lifelong member and a retired half-colonel living on the edge of Salisbury Plain. You know, fulminating over the scrambled eggs of a morning about everything that's gone wrong and insisting we bring back the lash immediately. Now, I always have a bit of a problem with this at UKIP meetings, because afterwards somebody always comes up and says, oh, by the way, I am a retired half-colonel. And by the way, it never did me any harm. So you do get a bit of that. But the truth of it is that UKIP, which I absolutely accept because I was there and I was a part of it, UKIP was set up after the ultimate failure of the Maastricht rebels to stop that treaty going through. Yes, they tried damn hard, but in the end, when it came to a motion of confidence, and that was the method, of course, that Major used to get the treaty through, apart from Rupert Allison, who took a bird to New York for the weekend, apart from him, all the rest of them draped through the lobby and supported the Major government. So it was out of Maastricht that UKIP was actually formed, and there is no question that we were, in the 1990s, overwhelmingly a protest party made up of Conservatives who viewed Maastricht as a betrayal of what we believed in, namely the self-governance and liberty of the people of these islands. That's how we started, and nothing wrong with that. But that is not what UKIP is today, 20 years on. 20 years on, UKIP as a party has created its own political space. And we're not just a party that talks about who governs Britain, vital though that is. Indeed, it's more than vital. It's actually the most important constitutional question that we've faced in 300 years. But we're not just about that. We're also a party about a vision for how that country could and should be governed once we've won the referendum. And we're the party putting out the idea that we can re-engage globally. We're the party saying, let's scrap the ridiculous Climate Change Act, which is not just putting up We're the party that's saying it is outrageous that social mobility in Britain is now lower than it was 60 years ago. That if you look through business, if you look through culture, if you look through media, if you look through sport, the 7%, and I'm one of them, the 7% who are lucky enough to go to the private schools now dominate British public life in a way that says to us that something's gone badly wrong. And we're now the champions for giving bright kids with poor backgrounds in our big cities the opportunity to excel through bringing back grammar schools and giving people. Developing a full manifesto, but the fascination of what UKIP is doing is these big questions. And now I'm going to come to the biggest question. These big questions unite people across the left and right of politics in a way that the current Conservative Party cannot possibly hope to do. You see, the biggest single issue on the minds of ordinary decent families out there is the question of immigration. It is. Just look at the fundamental change that has taken place in every one of our market towns and cities over the course of the last decade and a half to realise something fundamentally has gone wrong. The country that has always been the most tolerant and open-minded of all European countries, the country that reached out after 1950, particularly to our Commonwealth, the country that was happy to accept 30 to 50,000 people a year coming to live, work and settle in this country, is now the country that has 500,000 people a year coming to settle in it. And I'm sorry, but with 1 million young people unemployed, with the wages of our skilled and semi-skilled workers being driven through the floor, with the chronic pressures it's putting on primary schools, the National Health Service and all of our public services, the time has come for us to say 500,000 people a year is simply unsustainable and too much for this country to be prepared to put up with. And so, but of course, nothing can be done. Yes, of course, we can restrict immigration from other parts of the world, although quite why we would choose to discriminate against Australians or Indians in favour of Eastern Europeans rather beats me. I think there is a concept of the wider Commonwealth, in fact, as being the English-speaking family of the world, and perhaps we should have a greater allegiance to them than to Eastern Europe. But because of EU membership, there is nothing we can do about the total open door to Eastern Europe. And it's about to get worse, because we're about to open the door on the 1st of January next year to the whole of Bulgaria and Romania. Now, I'm sorry, not only do we have very little in common with those countries, but we can't, for the reasons I've given before, afford to even take the risk of another major influx coming into this country. And we have the other dimension to this, which of course nobody dares to talk about, and that is the level of crime that is coming into Britain from Romania. And frankly, it is truly shocking. We only have figures for the Metropolitan Police area. We don't have them yet for the rest of the country, but we will. But 92% of all ATM crime in London is committed by Romanians. Out of a Romanian population in Britain that is 80,000 maximum, and that's spread across the whole country, there have been 27,500 arrests of Romanians in the Met area alone over the course of the last 5 years. And there is nothing we can do to stop these people coming in. There is nothing we can do to stop all the Romanian criminal gangs coming in from the 1st of January next year. And if they commit crimes, there is nothing we can do to get rid of them. And I think what we need to say is this. This country needs a proper, sensible, open immigration system that is based upon the model the Australians have. Let's have good people who obey the law, who've got skills, who haven't got life-threatening diseases, and let's take back the right for us to decide who comes to Britain, and if they come to Britain and commit crimes, let's have the right to deport them immediately. And all the other messages that we are reaching out. I came up this morning on an early train and I went to Salford. I went to a Labour ward in Salford, the kind of ward in which they have waived the Labour vote since the First World War. The kind of area where a Tory canvasser, frankly, would barely have the courage to walk down the street. They'd have been wasting their time there 30 years ago, let alone today. And yet, in that ward, where the election took place in June, and where UKIP had never stood before, we came second in that ward in June. The councillor has died, there's a by-election. It's a safe Labour ward. I'm not going to say that UKIP will win that seat on the 10th of October, but I'll tell you what, we'll run the Labour Party damn close. And that's the point about UKIP. We're not just picking up disaffected Tory votes. We're not just, as the Tory press would have you believe, damaging the Conservative Party. We are creating a new political movement in this country. You know, when we formed the Eastleigh campaign earlier this year, and we rocketed up from 3% of the vote to 28% of the vote, and almost took the seat, all the Tory press wrote that the Tories have been denied winning the seat back by the UKIP vote. But the analysis said that a third of our vote had come from the Tories. A third of our vote had come from the Lib Dems. 20% of our vote in Eastleigh had come from Old Labour, and 10% of our vote were either first-time voters or people who'd not voted for anybody for 20 years or more, who felt re-engaged and excited by British politics, by the UKIP message. And that is the other reason why I couldn't contemplate a deal with the Conservatives, is I couldn't do a deal with the Conservative Party on behalf of that eclectic band of voters. They don't want me to sell out UKIP to Mr Cameron or anybody else. They want me to lead this party on, not just to victory in the general election. They want this party to win representation in Westminster in 2015 in the general election. And that's the point. And Bill Cash doesn't get it, and even Peter O'Gorn, who I last shared the platform with, simply doesn't get it. They don't get it. Something is changing in British politics. UKIP is a new phenomenon, it's a new force. I'm not close-minded about local associations doing deals in some cases with genuine Eurosceptic local MPs. You know, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who I think has been a tremendous force for good in every way. I really do. I really do. As, you know, a chap who's brought some real honesty and sincerity into the House of Commons. And what a magnificent sight it was to see that double-breasted Savile Row suit in Romford Market last week. It was tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. But, you know, Jacob Rees-Mogg says we must talk at local level about doing a deal with UKIP. And if his association wants to go along to our local association and talk about a joint badging or whatever it may be, then I'm completely open-minded about doing that. And similarly, you know, if Austin Mitchell or one of the Labour Eurosceptics wanted to do the same thing, I'd say, well, look, we might not agree on some elements of economic or domestic policy, but in the bigger interest of the cause, you know, we might want to do a local deal. So I'm not closing my mind to those things, but I am genuine and sincere when I say that I really do think this party has got every opportunity of winning those European elections next year, of causing the earthquake that I think British politics needs. I genuinely believe that on the same day, you know, if we were able to win 150 council seats this year in the counties, when I doubted we win more than 20, we've got the chance next year of winning hundreds of seats on local councils, and we will then, for the first time in UKIP's history, ruthlessly target constituencies. And the argument in those target constituencies will be, this is not about whether you split the vote and let Labour in the south, or whether you split the vote in the north and let the Liberals in or the Tories in. This in those target constituencies will be about this. As we proved in the county elections, as we'll prove next year, increasingly in those target areas, if you vote UKIP, what you will get is UKIP MPs sitting in Westminster, and if there are enough of us, I promise you one thing, there really will be a referendum then. Thank you.
And on an earlier occasion, Nigel arrived at the Conservative Party conference in a tank, I seem to recall.
I did. I was showing off in those days. I was. It was 2006. The Tories were here in Manchester, and we got an armoured personnel carrier, and I climbed up onto it. I mean, with sort of, you know, leather-soled shoes on, a complete act of madness. And we parked outside the conference, and the message was that I was parking my tanks on David Cameron's lawn, and I rather enjoyed that. And so stunts became quite a thing with me, until one day in 2010, I got into a light aircraft that was towing a van, and I've stopped doing it.
You've well and truly breached the defences this year. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Nigel is very happy to take questions from you, but I must insist that they are questions, not speeches, please. So, may I see some hands, and I'll call the first. Yes, the gentleman, then the third row. Can you please give your name and any organisation you're from, if you are? Thank you very much.
Meredith Lloyd, Solid Conservatives. You say you ruled out national elected deals with the Conservative Party and you're open-minded locally. What's your criteria for selecting those MPs? Are you going out to them, they come to you, does it have to be signed off to better off out, or what's your criteria for...
Well, if they weren't signed up to better off out, we'd be wasting our time before we even started. So, you know, I've long been a fan of the Freedom Association's Better Off Out campaign, so that is absolutely a starting point. No, it needs sitting MPs or not them, but their local associations, to enter into a negotiation with our local associations. That's what it needs. But I'm not, I am not going to dictate how this should happen. I've made the point. Cameron can't stand us and won't do a deal with us. We couldn't do a deal with him anyway, because we increasingly represent an electorate that comes from across the spectrum, and frankly, would be rather a betrayal of them if I even contemplated it. But if at local level it happens, I'm not going to be a bully boy from the centre of UKIP saying, you can't do this. So it really is up to, your associations to approach ours. And let's see what happens. I mean, I suspect that central office will try and kill the whole thing, at birth. But it depends how many there are, I suppose, doesn't it? And you get to a point where, you can control a party if you have one rebel here or one rebel there, but if suddenly there were 24 of them, it becomes perhaps slightly different.
Yes, the gentleman there, and then the gentleman in the front row.
Thank you. Peter Stevens, Bury Slevens in Suffolk. In your literature for the council campaign, you said you support fox hunting. Can you give me a commitment that you will repeal the 2004 Hunting Act?
Well, personally, Peter, if I got anywhere near it, I'd get rid of it. I think there is perhaps, before we do that, and recognising that takes time, an even bigger priority, and that is, given we have elected police and crime commissioners, is to make sure we get elected police and crime commissioners who, in conjunction with the police force, make sure we don't waste a penny of taxpayers' money, pursuing whether people are out hunting with dogs or not. That short term is the right way round, and I think actually getting this through the House of Commons will be a tough thing to do. But giving counties the ability to call referendums on this subject actually would give the opportunity for rural counties to get back to hunting legally, which they can't at the moment. I'm completely with you on this. I think government has gone too far. Whether we want to go and hunt foxes or maybe, smoke our pipe in the back room of a local pub, frankly, I take the view we're big enough and ugly enough to make those decisions for ourselves, and government should get the hell out of that.
Ryan Sylvester, I'm a councillor in UKIP councillor in Cheshire East. In May, David Cameron gave an interview to the media in Spain, and he was asked the question, if the people of the UK voted to come out of Europe, would he take UK out of Europe? And he said, no, I won't take UK out of Europe. So there we have it. The whole thing about the referendum is just a facade. We will never come out of Europe with the Labour Party or the Tory Party. The only way to get out of Europe is to vote UKIP.
Yeah, that was an interview in El País, and I was very surprised by his response. But it gets to the heart of his biggest problem, which is trust. I don't trust him on this issue. I don't think the country trusts him on this issue. And in fact, as he continually now makes policy announcements that are 180 degrees the reverse of everything he stood for as leader since 2005, the whole thing becomes a bit of cry wolf, frankly. You're right. Really winning this is going to be a problem, because there is this new disease that has crept in from Brussels, which is if the electorate say something you don't like, either ignore them and rebrand the treaty or make them vote again. Interesting, wasn't it? The day after the Syria vote, we were greeted by Paddy Ashdown on our breakfast TV screens, telling us that Britain had lost global influence, to which I thought, well, if he means we're not going to bomb everybody, if that means losing global influence, I'm quite relaxed about that. But it was very interesting that Paddy Ashdown thought the House of Commons should vote again. And even Boris Johnson, who I've got some time for in many, many ways, even Boris Johnson thought the House of Commons would need a rethink and would need to vote again. So we have a political class, a professional political class, who was so intent on their model of the world being imposed that you're quite right, we have to be cautious and careful. I honestly don't think we should spend too much time worrying about that now. What we should spend time worrying about is how we actually get a referendum. Because remember that all three parties and every election since 1997 have all promised a referendum in their manifesto, and none of them have delivered. And we've got to get them to deliver. And I answer that by the way I ended my little talk a moment ago. The way we get a referendum is to make sure there are enough UKIP MPs in Westminster in 2015, and then it will happen.
Gentleman at the front there, and then the gentleman just behind him afterwards.
Thank you. Tony Woodcock-Poole. Hello again, Mr Farage. I was at your bash in Town Hall just previously, where Bill Cash and, surprisingly, Peter Owen were absolutely intent on scaring the audience into not voting for UKIP in 2015 because we might get Mr Miliband. Now, when I go into the polling booth in 2015, I want to know whether I will get government in the interest of the British people, or will I get a person in Downing Street who believes in managing Britain on behalf of Brussels?
Well, I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, I spent 20 years, before getting into politics, I spent 20 years working in the commodities business, a small segment of Britain's biggest industry, financial services, and since 2010, under this government, we've given away control of that industry to Monsieur Barnier, an unelected bureaucrat who wishes the city nothing but ill, and 3 new European regulatory authorities. And we're still playing this game. And the media do it every day on the Today programme and wherever I go. We're still playing this game that we're actually in control of our own country when 75% of our laws are now made somewhere else. Yes, I know Red Ed is veering off a bit to the left here and there, and that Dave appears to be moving back in a different direction. But in reality, all the while we're part of this union, we're voting not at general elections for a change of government, we're voting for a change of management. And that, above all, I think, is what we have to reverse. Indeed, I believe it to be the most important constitutional question this country has faced in centuries. And I'm intent on reversing it. And I now think we've got a head of steam behind us, because British public opinion wants to change it as well. And we are going to change it, don't you worry.
Gentleman right in the very back corner.
Hello, Christopher Manby, Colchester Conservatives. The EU costs Britain something like 11 billion in membership fees after Mrs Thatcher's rebate is taken into account. For that sum, we give up control of our borders, we give up our national sovereignty, we swallow the CAP, we swallow European social and environmental regulations. My question to you would be that if there was any part of European policy that you could just wish away, make disappear overnight, what would it be? And the second part of my question would be, is there anything you think we actually benefit from in the European Union?
Well, if I could wish any of it away, I think Herman Van Rompuy comes first. I just don't think there's any, poor old Barroso is probably second. I think the question, in a sense, shows the problem. That you're almost being lulled into what Cameron wants you to think, which is that somehow there is an a la carte menu here. And we can pick the bits we like and reject the bits we don't like. So we can't. Now, this renegotiation would achieve no more than Wilson did back in 1974-75. Cameron will come back and say, isn't it marvellous? We can catch herrings in the Solent or something like that. I tell you what, if Mr Cameron was serious, what he would do is go to Brussels before Christmas and say, the treaty we signed 40 years ago, we never envisaged would lead to the open doors to poor Eastern European countries like this, and what we're going to do is say no to opening the door to Bulgaria and Romania on January the 1st. If Mr Cameron won back a concession like that, I would take him extremely seriously indeed. And that is my challenge to him, and you know, and I know, that actually he will ignore it. I want to make it clear, there is no a la carte menu. I want to make it clear, I don't want to beg through a renegotiation for crumbs from the table. I want our relationship with Europe to be based on trade, cooperation and common sense. And I want us to be a self-governing nation that doesn't view the future of Britain as being European. I want us to view the future of Britain as being global and getting back the ability to make our own trade deals, and starting off with the Commonwealth strikes me as being a better, more positive world than the one we're currently stuck in.
Yes.
Gentleman in the very back corner, and then gentleman, I think it's the third row.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being Conservative for Scotland. Obviously, I agree with saying that the EU referendum could really well of course, we've got other big referendums in Scotland at the moment on independence, and the now big fears all through Scottish Conservatives in that debate is that obviously the left-wing discourse of the debate, but also that if we do leave, Salmon wants to take us into the European Union and the Lisbon settlement, and also increase immigration, which are big fears. What will you do personally to help support our side of the campaign, also to ensure that Scotland is found in the kingdom, but hopefully leaves the EU?
Well, I did actually go up to Edinburgh to have to take part in a Scottish debate back in the summer. I never thought I'd complain about being locked in a pub, you know. The Scottish political debate on this has been a complete farce for the last 20 years and more. Salmon has been allowed to put forward his vision of an independent Scotland, free from Westminster, but part of the European Union, unchallenged. Unchallenged because not only does Salmon not want genuine independence for Scotland, but his opponents in the Labour, Conservative and Lib Dems, they don't even want independence for Britain. So they haven't dared to challenge it. And there is this basic flaw in the SNP's argument. You cannot be independent and be a member of the European Union, and the Tory side of the argument has just given up the ghost on that. So, you know, we're doing our little bit in a very small way to try and rectify that. Luckily, Mr. Barroso has actually helped us enormously, for the first time ever, by making clear to Salmon that if he left the UK, he'd have to apply to reapply to join the EU and sign a treaty committing Scotland to joining the Euro, and the Scots don't like that. So I think that's a good thing. But I will go to Scotland again. What a bad pub, you know. And,
You could bring your tank.
I will go to Scotland again, and I will start to make these arguments. But frankly, I think the referendum is a farce, and it sums up so much of British politics, that a political class have these entirely false debates, and no one from the outside is allowed in. The good news is, I'm quite certain Scotland won't break to separate from Westminster next year. And I think the other good news is that once we need to sort the EU thing out first, but I believe we're headed towards a different settlement for the entire United Kingdom. We're headed towards a federal United Kingdom, and none of us should fear that. Actually, it's a federal United Kingdom that will hold the UK together, in my opinion, and get a proper voice and a fair deal for the English, something which has been badly overlooked.
Gentleman in the third row there, and then the gentleman about 10 rows in the back.
Chris Williams, Islington Conservatives. Mr. Farage, you've expressed gratitude to those Conservative MPs who voted against the war and decided that vote in the direction of the wishes of your party. Such gratitude that, barring a miracle, you're committed to standing yourselves against them. Likewise, the same with the better off out people, barring a miracle, basically. Isn't it about time your party started thinking about people rather than parties, and working with those people who support your policies, rather than just through lip service, but directly, as they've done in Australia, with very happy results there?
Well, you know, I mean, I just shared a platform with Bill Cash, right? And Bill boasted to the audience that he'd voted against the Maastricht Treaty 47 times, and they all cheered. Wonderful, good old Bill, he's a hero. What Bill didn't tell them is how he voted on the 48th occasion, which was the motion of confidence debate that John Major used to get the Maastricht Treaty through. And with the exception of Rupert Allison, who'd taken a bird to New York for the weekend. With the exception of him, every one of those Maastricht rebels went through the lobby, supported Mr Major in the motion of confidence, and gave us the Maastricht Treaty. They didn't have the guts, or the courage, or frankly the self-respect, to put their country before their party, and that's why we're in the mess we're in. Now, if you can convince me, and yes, of course, you know, I do think there are some backbenchers who've been very brave, much helped by us, I might say. You know, we've opened up the arguments, we've worried them in the constituencies, and they're speaking out, and that's good. But if I thought, you know, that there were backbenchers there, who, if it came to that historic decision again, would actually say, to hell with my Prime Minister, to hell with my tribe, I would vote against them in a motion of confidence, I might think again. But I've not yet met anybody in today's House of Commons who's prepared to do that.
Nigel, if I may take you up on that. Our own president of the Freedom Institute, Christopher Gill, was one of those groups of massive rebels. But he, you know, it's a man of principle, I think I would agree, still voted for the government and that motion of their confidence. So,
well, yes, because they all took the view, if we do this, there'll be an election and we'll finish up with a Labour government. And it's the tribal thinking that kicks in. Labour will be worse than Tory. You know, it makes no difference if you're giving away your country. You know, if they should, and it's not just about, I mean, actually, there were people in the cabinet at the time who now, that was one of them whose name's here, people in the cabinet who now talk a very good Eurosceptic game, who did nothing. Not only on Maastricht, but on the referendum amendment. If they'd been sincere, they could have gone into Major and said, unless you're going to give us a referendum, we're going to bring you down. And no such thing happened. So you know, I do understand what the questioner's saying, but my problem is, when it really comes to it, I'm concerned whether these people can or will actually deliver.
Gentlemen, then the lady in the front row.
Phil Clark from Orpington. I think we will get a referendum, but I think when we do get it, there's a decent chance that people in this country will vote to stay in Europe, if only because of the sheer number of Europeans already here. Eventually, there's a stay in Europe vote. Will you do the decent thing and dissolve UKIP? Or will you keep banging the drum like a child that can't?
Well, I might jump on Peachy Head for all you know, I don't know. Look, I'm sorry, I'm not even going to accept that question, because I'm not prepared to contemplate failure, because I think something has changed in this country, something fundamental has changed in this country since my parents had a go at this question, albeit a different one, back in 1975. The great British public have woken up, and now whole sections of British commerce, business and industry are waking up to the fact that we are being limited and held back as members of this union, and the only thing that is keeping us trapped there is our career political class. And once we smash through that ceiling, I am confident, sir, that not only will we win the referendum, we'll win it handsomely too.
The lady in the front, then the gentleman right at the very back by the window.
Caroline Strafford, Beaconsfield. Do you think the time has now come for your party, in fact, to be renamed the Common Sense Party?
Well,
not only do you want to come out of Europe, you are anti-HS2.
HS2, I thought you might say that. Yeah, I thought you might say that. Yeah.
And pro-grammar schools.
Yeah, well, when I heard Beaconsfield, I thought HS2 might just pop up.
It's the business case, not NIMBY.
I can't think I've ever seen a barbier economic argument in my life but the business case for HS2. You know, and I got on the train at Euston this morning and got off at Manchester Piccadilly, which is right in the heart of the business district in Manchester. No need to commute anywhere, I mean, virtually walk everywhere that you might need to go for a meeting, and it was 2 hours, 2 minutes. You know, the idea that reducing that by 40 minutes or whatever it may be in 25 years' time when the line is built, the idea that is going to bring more business to Manchester is, of course, totally disproved by what happened with the Paris-Marseille route, which was 6 hours, Paris-Marseille. They built the TGV, it became 3 hours, and suddenly Paris was doable for a day in business, and it drove more business to Paris. I can't see an argument for this HS2 thing. I really cannot see an argument. And if you look at the lack of connections at either end of it, in the end, actually, it isn't going to save much time anyway. I think it is absolute blind madness with which the coalition are pushing on with this. And you will know, of course, that in Buckinghamshire, even in Great Missenden, for goodness sake, you know, UKIP have now established ourselves on local district councils. We've got 6 members of Bucks County Council, and I think if the government carries on in defiance of common sense up and down the HS2 line, it is quite possible that some of our first Westminster seats could come on those routes, and perhaps, madam, even in your county too.
Yes.
May I just mention, by the way, that in the exhibition area outside, there's a stand by the anti-HS2 people. Very good outfit. Obviously, they don't have the vast amounts of money required for a stand in the main exhibition area of the conference. So please do pay them a visit.
Well, perhaps they're banned as well. Who knows?
This ban on you has been very effective.
I'm loving it.
We've had to turn people away here. You've already addressed a huge packed meeting. And by the way, afterwards, if anybody's free, there's Nigel's going on. He's been very well behaved here. He's just got a glass of water. But he's at 6 o'clock. There's a beer and a fag with Farage in the comedy store. So if you've and I know one or two of you have been to the early meeting today. So if somebody wants to do 3 meetings of the day, that's your chance. There's a gentleman right at the very back by the window, and then the gentleman by the aisle there.
My name is Nigel Farage. I think the European policies should be listened to. However, more domestic policies seem more unrealistic, such as you wanted to commit to a 40% increase in defence spending in your manifesto. How would you fund that, or where would you cut money from to fund this spending?
No, that's a perfectly fair question. You know, there are very few areas of government spending that we think need to be increased, but one of them is defence, where we've slashed our defences to the level where, frankly, despite endless foreign interventions, we frankly couldn't defend ourselves. And I thought that little protest that happened in the hall yesterday from the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers probably spoke for a very large number of people in Manchester who were very committed to that regiment. It had no problem with recruitment, and yet this government has done more than any peacetime government to destroy our fine services in this country, and I think it is a shame, and I think those 2 old boys were right in the hall yesterday afternoon during the Now look, we cannot as a party say, by not giving £20 billion a year to the European Union, all of our problems will be solved. But it's a good start, isn't it? Allied to which, the nearly £1 billion a month that Mr Cameron seems to be so proud of, that goes in the foreign aid budget, it would seem to me needs a pretty massive and swift reduction. All right? But, and here's something that this government hasn't dared to touch. And let's remember this nonsensical debate about cuts. There are no cuts. There are no cuts overall. At the end of the lifetime of this Parliament, under Osborne's chancellorship, our national debt will have increased by 40%. So we're still engaged on a massive Keynesian borrowing and spending spree, and we shouldn't forget that for a moment. Now, it is up to UKIP at the time of the next general election, not European, but general election, to put forward something that shows where radical cuts are going to need to come. And it's a policy that will not be universally popular when we first put it forward, and it's going to take some real guts and courage to put it forward. But frankly, the massive growth in bureaucracy and quangocracy in this country, and it's almost become interchangeable with politics, isn't it? You know, you lose your job as a politician and go off and head up some quango. And if you don't, maybe your cousin gets the job. And we all know what I'm talking about, and I'm trying not to get myself or the Freedom Association sued. But you know, we all know what I'm talking about. Frankly, that is where massive cuts are going to have to come. And there are many in the professional, career, political and media classes who are going to scream and shout and absolutely hate it, but I have no doubt it'll have to be done, and that perhaps is the moment at which UKIP will show whether it really is a serious party that will get a good number of seats in Westminster politics. We've got to put forward that open, truthful manifesto, and I can promise you, sir, it's very much in my mind to do so at the right time towards the end of next year.
Gentleman about fourth row.
Hello, I'm an expat. I live in Madrid. I've been there 13 years, and in 2 years' time I lose my vote. I'd like to know your views on the 15-year rule.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, this. It is a difficult one, this. You know, I mean, there is a principle that to have the vote, you know, you should be on a register or you should be part of this country. And to be honest with you, I haven't thought it through. I've had lots of letters from people like you saying, isn't it wrong that I'm losing the vote after 15 years? But then another part of me says, maybe we do need people to have a bit more of a direct connection with it. But can I just say, and I'll be honest, I haven't thought it through, I haven't reached an answer, but can I just say that there's something that does alarm me, and that's not about the expats after 15 years who might be losing the vote. What worries me when the referendum comes is who will qualify to vote in that referendum in this country. You know, and given the very, very large numbers of East Europeans living in Britain, if they all had the vote, we could find that would skew the result of a referendum. So whenever we do get to a referendum, there are lots of points we must pin down, but eligibility to vote, I think, is perhaps a very important one.
Gentleman there, and then the gentleman in the front row.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, John, this gentleman here first, then John, and I'll bring you in after. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, Thomas Pike, I'm a member of Birmingham University CF. You mentioned, Mr. Farage, about our need to strengthen trade links with India, Australia, other sort of Commonwealth countries. A number of political commentators have recently sort of floated the idea of an Anglosphere free trade agreement as an alternative to the European Union. If we were to leave the EU over the next decade, would that be something that yourself and your party would support?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, simple as, yes. You know, I shared a platform earlier this year with John Howard, the former Australian Prime Minister, and one of the finest Conservative figures of the last half a century, in my view. On the platform with him was Preston Manning, who founded the Reform Party of Canada, who did their job, and these countries are crying out for some sort of Anglosphere free trade agreement, and I personally would like to see that perhaps extend to many other parts of the Commonwealth, because I'm very struck that whilst we're giving £1 billion a month in foreign aid to African countries, and we're doing it to assuage our consciences, at the same time we're putting such massive tariffs on their products and their green beans that they can't trade their way out of poverty. And I think we should be more radical. Let's stop giving them aid, let's reduce the tariffs, bring them into a Commonwealth Free Trade Club and allow them to trade their way back to prosperity. That's it.
We'll just take two more questions. It's John here and the gentleman right at the very back.
John Strafford, Beaconsfield Conservatives. There is a natural centre-right majority amongst the British population, the electorate. Are there any potential leaders of the Conservative Party that you think you could do a deal with to bring the two parties together?
What a great question. I think that you can help that process, John, very much by lending your vote to UKIP on May the 22nd next year. And by making the Conservative members and MPs realise that under Mr Cameron they have no chance, zero chance, of reaching out to the blue-collar voter, social conservatives, all the people they would probably need to perhaps form a, difficult, but to perhaps form a majority. And if Mr Cameron goes, things might change. But it would need to be a very radical change. And I can't, as yet, see who that might be. Although I've always said that at least people like Michael Gove are open-minded about UKIP policy and don't throw continual insults at us. So perhaps someone who is prepared to actually think that whether they agree with us or not, we have a reasonable point of view. But to be continually called rude names, and to be barred from the secure zone, as if I'm some sort of modern-day Guy Fawkes, indicate, can you be barred to, or join the club, let's go for a pint afterwards. You know, maybe if Cameron goes, you know, there'll be a radical change of direction, but it's difficult to see right at the moment.
Just before I call on the last question, I'd just like to draw attention to the fact that, and Nigel mentioned this earlier on, that he supported our Better Off Out campaign right from the start, and was absolutely true to his word in not standing against MP. So it does have previous there, and I'd like to thank you for that, Nigel.
Thank you.
And I also would like to mention our Better Off Out campaign, which is going from strength to strength. Rory Broomfield, the director, is the front here, doing a fantastic job on that. So please do support that. There's more information on our stand outside. Also, on that subject, we have an amazing programme in the Freedom Zone tomorrow, particularly on the EU. The sessions of why the city will prosper outside the EU. There's another session on the Taxpayers' Alliance on how to fix corporate taxes. There's a session, I think, which would very much interest Nigel, called Why I Left the Tories and Why I'm Staying. And we've got an amazing panel there, including Roger Helmer, I believe, is in the audience now. But also some excellent people on the other side of that debate, including Rob Halfon, MP. So please do come there. We do have a really fantastic programme tomorrow, so I hope you'll support this then. I will also just give another plug to the Beer and Fag with Farage and the Liberty Lounge event in the Comedy Store afterwards. And as we believe in freedom of choice here, if you feel you've had enough of Nigel, especially if you heard him twice already today, we do have another event which is with Roger Helmer, a boat trip on the Manchester Ship Canal. And we do have a small number of places left on that. We did one yesterday with David Nuttall, chairman of the Better Off Out group in Parliament, a great guy. We had a fantastic evening. And we go past the BBC studios, palatial BBC studios, I should say, Media City, and you can make a suitable salute as you go past there. So, if any of you are interested, we have about 4 or 5 places of that. Please just come and see me afterwards. And now I'll take the final question from the gentleman at the back.
You may have already covered this now. Sorry, John Moran, by the way, from Kingston, UKIP branch. You may have covered this earlier. I had to leave for a much-needed lunch. But you very neatly steward and keep out Bill Cash and show him up for what he really is, I suppose. 48 times he voted against Mark. The final vote, he supported his mate John Major, he voted for it. Shame on him. But what political slant would you put on that, as far as the public is concerned, from the point of view that Bill Cash is supposedly a Eurosceptic, and in the end he signs the Maastricht Treaty?
Well, I don't think that. I don't think that it does for us to go to war with Bill Cash in public, because he's a lot better than most, all right? You know, and they were under great pressure and all the rest of it. It just, the reason it upset me, John, was he was so boastful about what he'd done, but it didn't quite give us the full details. I think that what we really need to talk about is the whole question of trust. It's about trust, this is. You know, the Labour government promised to give us a referendum on the Constitution. When it was rebranded the Lisbon Treaty, they denied it to us. How can we trust any of them to give us a referendum next time round? You see, Cameron's card at the moment is, I'm promising a referendum this year, not last year, but this year, and the others aren't. But you and I both know that come 2015, Labour will promise it too, the Lib Dems will promise it as well, and frankly, I still don't actually trust any of them. Their instinct would be not to let us have a referendum. They're bullied into promising us a referendum by a threat of rebellion in their own parties and a belief it will do them short-term good with the electorate. And I still insist, and I know some Tories here might not want to hear this, but I still insist, wake up and recognise something new and different is happening in British politics. This force called UKIP is here, and it's here to stay. It's a very eclectic mix of people that it brings together, and the stronger UKIP gets, then actually the better it will be for all of you, regardless what party you're in, that want us to have an independent, self-governing, united kingdom. And that's what I'm fighting for. And I believe I've achieved far more fighting for that in UKIP than I ever could have done on the backbenches of the Conservative Party.
Very good.